طلع تصلي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Dear listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are continuing on the series of the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the last session we discussed a story about the monk and the meeting of the Prophet ﷺ with this monk. And we mentioned that the scholars of Seerah, they have a difference of opinion and mixed views regarding this narration. Some scholars have narrated it and said it's okay to be narrated. Other more critical thinking scholars like Imam al-Dhahabi, he mentions that there's some issues and faults with this story. So we mentioned that now the Prophet ﷺ, he's growing up as a young boy and he's in the care of Abu Talib, his uncle. And we mentioned, just to kind of summarize the story, that the Prophet ﷺ was 11 to 12 years old during this time, and he went on a business trip to Syria. And on this trip, there was Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu an, and also Bilal radiallahu an accompanying the caravan, the trade caravan. So on the way to Syria, they passed by a monastery, a religious foundation, and there used to be a monk who used to stay here. And we mentioned that every single time a trade caravan of the Quraysh used to pass by this place, the monk never used to give them the time of the day. So he wasn't interested in them. He said these are the pagans, they're idol worshippers. But on this occasion, he came out. Not only did he come out, but he greeted the caravan and he welcomed them in. So they were quite surprised, and they asked, how come you have welcomed us? And he said, in your midst there is a boy who is going to become a prophet. And they asked him, how do you know this? And he said some of the signs, that when he was walking, the clouds were shadowing him, and when he was resting by the tree also leant over to give him shade, and the stones, they prostrated to him. So while they were having this feast, there was a tribe of 7 Roman soldiers that came to look for the Prophet ﷺ, and they were inquiring that where is this young boy? And before Bahira the monk, he realizes this and he hides the Prophet ﷺ. And then after the Roman soldiers have gone, he instructs Abu Talib that take this boy back to Mecca. I fear for him. And it's mentioned that he was taken back to Mecca by Abu Bakr and Bilal at the time. So some of the scholars like Tirmidhi, this story is mentioned in Tirmidhi. Ibn Hajar has mentioned this story as well, and Al-Hakim and others. But some of the critical scholars that are critical thinkers like Imam al-Dhahabi, he mentions that there's some issues with this story. And we mentioned some of the issues with the story, that Bilal radiallahu anh wasn't born at the time. So how could he accompany the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr on a trade journey to Syria? And there was also other things like, for example, he mentioned that if the Prophet ﷺ was told as a young boy that he was going to be a prophet of Allah, then how come later on in his life, when he was given the prophethood, when Jibreel ﷺ came down with revelation, how come he didn't remind his uncle at the time when he was giving da'wah to him, that don't you remember that we went and we met Bahira the monk and he mentioned that I was going to be a prophet of Allah? So there's many things that some of the scholars, they've said that they don't really add up, and usually the scholars, the critical thinking scholars, they mention this story and they say Allah knows best in this situation. So today inshallah we're going to be talking a little bit about the Fijar wars, and the Prophet ﷺ, he was around 15 years old at this time. Some narrations, Ibn Ishaq mentions that he was around 20 years at this time, but the reconciliation here is that the Fijar wars, they were wars that took place for many years. So the Prophet ﷺ, could have been 20 or 15 at the time. Obviously, we mentioned previously that nobody's recording dates. Important events, dates were marked by important events. So we mentioned like the time when the Prophet ﷺ was born. That year was known as the year of the elephants, because the army of Abraha came to destroy the Kaaba. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's not in the front line in this war. If we take his age as being 15, because 15 is the age where you're allowed to start carrying a sword. So the narrations, they mentioned that in this battle, the Prophet ﷺ, he was not on the front line. And this battle, Fijar or Harbul Fijar, basically translates as the sacrilegious war, something which is inappropriate and in violation of ethics, morals, and the religion of the people at the time. So Islamically, when we use the word Fijar or Fujur, it means a violation of the religion. And the reason for this is because this war took place in one of the 4 sacred months. So even in Islam today, we have the 4 months, Muharram, Rajab, Dhul Qa'dah and Dhul Hijjah. These are the 4 sacred months where no war is allowed. And you should also refrain from doing sins. Sins at any time of the year, but more so in these 4 months. So the Arabs, they had deemed these months the 4 sacred months, and the spilling of blood and the committing of any misdeeds were strictly prohibited in these months. So these were also referred to as the haram months, the forbidden months. So the Battle of Fijar took place in one of these months, Dhul Qa'dah, and this is why it acquired its name, because there was a lot of bloodshed spilled on both sides of the army, and both sides committed great injustice and cruelty. Now, how did this war start? Some of the narrations, they mentioned that this war went on for many, many years, and there were various battles. And we mentioned that in the pre-Islamic society, the Jahili society, that there was very little compassion, very little rahmah, and everybody was only focused on themselves. And at this time, there was a person by the name Barwad, and he was from Banu Kinana. So Banu Kinana is a tribe from the tribes of Quraysh. Some Sirah scholars, they mention that Quraysh is actually part of Banu Kinana. And then there was another tribe, and in this tribe called Hawazin, there was a person by the name Urwatul Wahal. And this tribe, Hawazin, was part of a bigger tribe called Qais al-Aylan. And this tribe was situated in Ta'if. So today, when we go to Saudi Arabia, or when we think about Saudi Arabia, what are the 2 main cities which come to mind? Right? From a spiritual perspective, we say Mecca and Medina. But actually, the 2 big cities at that time were Mecca and Ta'if. And even there's reference to this in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا نُزِّلَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنُ عَلَى رَجُلٍ مِّنَ الْقَرْيَتَيْنِ عَظِيمٍ. That when the people, they were asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why was this Quran not sent down upon a great man from one of the 2 cities? And the 2 cities being referred to here were Makkatul Mukarramah and Ta'if. So even later on, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his early years of prophethood in Mecca, Makkatul Mukarramah, when he realized that he had exhausted all avenues and all means of preaching Tawheed to the people of Mecca, where did he look to? He didn't look to Yathrib. Yathrib was a small town at the time. Rather, he turned his attention to Ta'if at the time, because he saw Ta'if as a huge city, a huge opportunity where he could give the da'wah to the people. So, coming back to the nature of the conflict, Barwad, from the tribe of Quraysh, Kinana, we mentioned, he realized he was involved in business, and he realizes that Urwa from the tribe of Hawazin starts selling to his customers. He's starting to give them exclusive discounts, a better deal. So in today's day and age, when we assess ourselves in business, in trade, what is the situation of a believer? What is the attitude, or what should the attitude of a believer be towards competition in the marketplace? And we all know our situation in the marketplace, right? If we're in a business and somebody across the road starts the same business, we start swearing, we start backbiting, we start slandering, we start assuming, we start spying about that person, right? We want to do everything, each and everything, to destroy that person's business. Unfortunately, there are people like this in the society. Whether it's on Amazon or eBay, somebody's launched a similar product to you, so you want to buy their product and leave a negative review out of spitefulness. This goes on in the community. But what is the situation of a believer? The believer is one who realizes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides sustenance, and He is the bestower. He is the one who supplies. And there's a story that was mentioned, Allah knows best if it's true, but it was going around on WhatsApp for a while, regarding a shop that opened up in Saudi Arabia. And it was next to one of the flagship stores. And it was in direct competition with the flagship store. So this person, he mentions that he's setting up the store, and his competitor, they sent their resources to help him set up his shop. And he was quite surprised, and he asked this question naturally, that, I'm in competition with you guys. How come you're being so kind and generous? And they said, our bosses told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider, that Allah provides. So this should be the attitude of a Muslim, a believer, that rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have many, many examples of this in the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the companions, when they used to trade and do business, a person comes to buy something from a person's shop, and he says, would you mind buying from the other brother? Because today I have had a good day of sales, and this brother has done less than me. So this is the ethics, the morals that they displayed in business. And we see the time when the Muslims of Mecca, they migrated to Medina. Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, he was a businessman. But because of the cruelty, because of the persecution in Mecca at the time, these people, they had to leave their families, their belongings, their wealth, their property back in Mecca. Imagine having to travel such a long distance. There were no cars in those days, right? You either travel by horse or camel, and it's a long journey. We mentioned in previous sessions that around 7 to 8 days approximately. If you're on a horse, you can do it faster. So the unlimited provision you have to take with you. So imagine the companions that are muhajirin, that are arriving from Mecca into Medina with very little provision. So what did the Prophet ﷺ do? The Prophet ﷺ, and we'll come on to this when we discuss the Medinan period, but the Prophet ﷺ, he started to bring the brothers together, build a bond of brotherhood between the Muslims, and he started pairing one muhajirin and one ansar together, so that they would be able to look after each other. The ansar, who are at home, they can provide services for their fellow Muslim brothers. So Abdul Rahman ibn Auf was paired with Sa'd ibn Rabi'ah. And Sa'd ibn Rabi'ah, he was one of the wealthiest men in Medina at the time. Imagine, right? You come from Mecca, you don't know about your future, you get to Medina, and you realize that the Prophet ﷺ has paired you with one of the wealthiest men in Medina. Eid has come early, right? The wealthiest man, one of the wealthiest men in Medina, it's Eid, right? Let's see what he's going to give me. So Ibn Rabi'ah, he says, my brother, amongst the people of Medina, I have the most wealth. So firstly, he's sharing this great secret, right? Usually when we earn money, we keep everything hush hush. It's personal to us. I've earned this much money. I don't want anybody to know about it. As soon as this Sahabi realizes that he's being paired with a muhajirin from Mecca, and this is his brother, he expresses to him that I am one of the wealthiest people in Medina. I have 2 orchards, and I have 2 wives. See which one of the 2 orchards you want. He didn't say this one's yours, this one's mine. No. You go, you explore, you analyze, and then you choose which one you feel is best. So he's preferring for his brother what he would prefer for himself. He's giving his brother the opportunity. So many lessons that we can learn just from this one hadith alone. And then he says, I have 2 wives. Tell me which one of them is pleasing to you, and I shall divorce one. So imagine the response of any other Muslim at the time. It would have been subhanallah, right? Eid has definitely come early, right? I'm getting a wife, I'm getting, mashallah, wealth, I'm getting an orchard. But what was the response of this Sahabi, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf? He was a businessman by trade. His father had trained him in the excellence of trade and being in the marketplace. So he responds to Ibn Rabi'ah. He says to him that, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your family, but just show me where the marketplace is. So this also goes to show that this Sahabi, he didn't take advantage of the generosity of his fellow Muslim brother, but rather he wanted to work for himself. So coming back to the meaning of Ar-Razzaq, Ar-Razzaq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq, who is the provider, but it doesn't just mean from a financial perspective. Rather, it means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He bestows all means of support and growth in terms of your body, your mind, and your spiritual life. So coming back to the story, Barwad, he sees Urwa at a campsite. And now it's time for him to go and confront Urwa. And he asks him that, have you been shortchanging me? Have you been trying to sell to my customers? So Urwa responds by saying, yes, I have. It's a free country. You have customers, they might buy something from you, but they're also going to buy something from me. So Barwad at this time, inside his burning. And it's mentioned that they met at a campsite, like a service station in this day and age. So he attacks Urwa, and they get into a physical fight, a confrontation, and during this physical fight, Urwa is killed by Barwad. Now, not only does he kill him, but we mentioned that this happens in one of the sacred months known as Dhul Qa'dah. So this is where this war, the Fijar war, gets its name from, the sacrilegious war. Now, when the tribe of Hawazin finds out, they find out that a respectable businessman in their community, in the society, has been unlawfully killed. So they now want to take up arms in defense of his honor. On the other side, the Quraysh, they are also contemplating what to do. Now they realize that one of their men has unlawfully killed another person. But instead of offering him up for retribution or paying blood money on behalf of the person who's died, they also took this personally. And they thought, the tribe of Hawazin, they're going to attack us, Quraysh from Mecca, the gatekeepers of the Haram. So they also picked up their arms and they started this war. So some narrations, they mention that there was a standoff for several years, meaning that there were only a few days in these years where actual warfare took place. And this was all about pride, right? Tribal pride, nationalism. You know, when we think about World War studies, I did World War studies in my A-levels, and we were going through some of the World War poetry at the time. So that some of the soldiers that were writing World War poetry before the World War, it was all about going into war is seen as fruitful and loving. It's a loving thing to die for one's country. There was this patriotism, there was this heroism, that I'm going to go into war and I'm going to show these people. I'm going to fight and I'm going to die for my country. But little did they realize that when they went into the front line and they realized the hardship of the warfare, then the poetry that they were writing during the warfare changed. So the poetry before the warfare was about being patriotic, about being lawful to one's country. And then it changed, the direction changes. That actually after I've lost an arm, after I've lost a leg, I need to think twice now about fighting for my country. So this is the thinking that the Quraysh and that tribe of Hawazin had at the time, that they would put tribal warfare at the front of every dispute. So the Prophet ﷺ now is part of the Quraysh side, tribe, and he is growing up as a young man in his teenage years. So he was given a task, and his task was to collect arrows. So the Hawazin tribe, they had military experience in terms of archery. They were experts in this field. They were able to place their archers in different fields, in different areas, and it just seemed like it was raining arrows at the time. So the Quraysh, they realized that so many arrows are coming over the fence. These are serviceable assets. So the job of the Prophet ﷺ was to go and pick up these arrows and give them to his uncles. So this had a profound impact on the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his experience in this warfare. And the Prophet ﷺ, right from the outset, he realized that this was an unjust war. That this was from the dignity of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that he never unjustly raised arms against anyone. Throughout the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, he never unjustly raised arms against anyone. And many of you might be thinking, well, in the Medina period, there were many battles, there were many wars. Yes, there were many battles and wars that took place in Medina after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ became a Rasul, a messenger, but there were profound reasons behind them. That the vast majority of the battles that took place in Islam, the scholars of Seerah, they say that these were defensive battles. Some were offensive. And the scholars of Seerah have said, at times, even being offensive in warfare is a defense mechanism. And to give a great example of this, if you're walking on the street and somebody attacks you, right, you've got a couple of options. You can either take cover, and that's a defense mechanism, or you can retaliate and call it self-defense. So you retaliating and being offensive is also a form of self-defense, and it's a defense mechanism. So sometimes there were times where the Muslims, they had to be on the offensive to either teach a lesson to the non-Muslims at the time, or to prevent a greater evil taking place at a later date. And we see many examples in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ in the Ghazwa of Tabuk, such a long journey, the Prophet ﷺ, he told the companions, he gave them advance notice about this Ghazwa, that it's a long journey, prepare yourselves, get your horses ready, make sure you have your provisions ready. And when they arrive at Tabuk, they come back without spilling any blood. So where the Prophet ﷺ, he realized an opportunity to avoid warfare, then the Prophet ﷺ took this up. And we see many other examples. At Fath Makkah, when the army of the Muslims, they came out, they had every opportunity to shed blood. They were strong in their numbers. Abu Sufyan, he comes and he says, we surrender. The Prophet ﷺ, he turns around and he welcomes this opportunity. Ahlan wa sahlan. Peace be upon you. Even at Bay'atul Ridwan, when the Sahaba, they were going to Umrah at the time, and they heard a rumor that spread in the camp that Uthman ibn Affan, who had gone to discuss with the Quraysh in Mecca, he had been martyred. And this was known as Bay'atul Ridwan. That the Prophet ﷺ, he took the pledge of allegiance from 1400 companions at that time, that we will fight till our death. Even then, after some time, when there was a discussion about a peace treaty, the Prophet ﷺ straight away, he said, okay, let's write a peace treaty, let's get involved. So we see many times the Prophet ﷺ, even in Badr, the first war in Islam, the first battle that took place in Islam, he asked the companions, we discussed this just a few sessions ago, he asked the companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, that what is your opinion on this matter, that we have now prisoners of war, what should we do with them? And Umar radiallahu anh said, we should teach them a lesson, we should kill them. And the Prophet ﷺ, he took the advice of Abu Bakr Siddiq, which was to ransom them, to give them back and take money for them. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he revealed a verse of the Quran saying that you should have teach them, the Quraysh, a lesson, and set an example for the people of the Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ, during his young age, he sees the evil of war, and even during warfare, even later on, when the Prophet ﷺ became a Prophet of Allah in Medina, he taught the companions, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, he taught them about the morals and the ethics of warfare. That when you participate in the battle, there's certain etiquettes, there are certain things that you should and shouldn't do. For example, if you've killed a person in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you should not mutilate the person's body. We see sometimes things have taken place in other parts of the world and it comes in on the media, a person has died, and the situation of the body as a result of this aggressive attack or behavior at the time. So many things, even the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim, and we'll finish off with this hadith. Usama bin Zayd, may Allah be pleased with him, he reported that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ sent us to Huraqat, a tribe of Juhayna. We attacked that tribe early in the morning and defeated them. Then a man from the Ansar came, and I caught hold of a man of the defeated tribe. So they defeated this tribe, and there was one person who was there, and he was pleading for his life, and they held him. So when we overcame him, he said, La ilaha illallah. Alright? Allah knows best whether he said it, whether it was true in his heart, or whether he said it out of fear. So at that moment, what the other Ansari that was there, he spared him. He had compassion for him. But I attacked him with my spear, and I killed him. By the time we went back to Al-Madinah, the news had already reached the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said to me, "Oh Usama, did you kill him after he professed La ilaha illallah?" Meaning he said to you, La ilaha illallah, did you kill him after this? And Usama said, yes, O Messenger of Allah. He professed it only to save his life. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, did you kill him after he professed La ilaha illallah? And he continued to ask this question until he said, I wished I had not embraced Islam before that day, so I would have not committed this sin. And in the other narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, why did you not cut out his heart open to find out whether he had done so sincerely or not? That's meaning that, did you know that this person had really done it? So even here, when we're not sure whether the person is lying or saying this out of fear, spare the person. So this was the Prophet ﷺ's attitude towards warfare, that he would only engage in it if it was a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when the need occurred. And even when you're fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are certain conditions of the warfare that need to take place, and certain etiquettes and behaviors that need to be taken into consideration. Inshallah, this brings us to the end of our session for today, and inshallah next we'll talk about Hilf al-Fudul. We discussed this a couple of sessions ago, and we mentioned we talk about it, but inshallah definitely this will be the next session. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.